The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Happy DFS Day, everybody. It's Wednesday. It's DFS Contest Day here at Hoop Ball. And you're listening to Fantasy NBA Today, our daily fantasy podcast. I'm your host, Dan Bespris. We got Mike Apotria coming up in about 20 seconds. But before we introduce our expert for the Beat the Expert contest, I wanted to make mention a couple of you out there that do listen to the show regularly. And as I've said before, I always take your thoughts very seriously. Said, look, much as I love every episode, I'm not a big DFS guy. So what I'm going to do on today's episode, and I'm going to try to tailor this thing a little bit better. Everything I do, I try to do to make things a tiny bit better, is right before we get into the DFS stuff, I'm going to try to let you guys know exactly where in the show you can get back into the season-long stuff. Now, what I'll say again is I really would love it if you'd give it a shot, listen to it, see if it piques your interest in any way, but if you're absolutely positively married to exclusively season-long, and I'll tell you right now, I said the same thing, and I only play our weekly Hoop Ball contest. It's the only DFS I do. I don't do it every day. It's too much time, frankly. I don't have that kind of time. I'd probably be getting better quicker if I did. But, again, if you're absolutely positively married to the notion that it's got to be season long or bust, I'm going to tell you right now, we get back into season long at the 34-minute mark. There you go. And now, without further ado, the expert that you might know from Beat the Expert. That's right. If you've heard the term Beat the Expert, this is the guy it's referring to. Mike Apotria. Good morning, Mike. Or good afternoon. I do this every week. It's afternoon for you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whenever you listen to it. I'm always happy to be on. I love talking on our DFS Wednesdays.
Were you Truman showing me there? Is that what that was?
I was trying to.
Yeah, I was hoping that you'd seen that movie. I've got you by a few years, right? How old are you? I always forget. You're late 20s?
Yeah, late 20. I'll be 28.
All right, so not that big of a gap, enough, and you're old enough where Truman Show happened when you were what, like elementary school?
Yeah, listen, I'm an oldie at heart. My father raised me on strictly like Bugs Bunny and everything, while everyone else was watching SpongeBob, and to this day I still watch Fraggle Rock. So
yeah, Fraggle Rock. Here's a fun story before we get into DFS, and my mother could probably tell it better than I could, so maybe I'll have Nana Evie get on this thing at some point and make a podcast appearance. But apparently, and people should have known that I was going to end up as a broadcaster of some kind. When I was like 19 months old, and my kid is the same way, very early talkers in the Bespris clan. We don't care for walking very much, but we love talking. Apparently, I memorized a Fraggle Rock book, and there's a video of me as like this sub-2-year-old kid walking around a living room and just reciting the words to a book and then going back to turn the page when I knew apparently that was when the page was supposed to be turned. It looks like I'm able to read, but I apparently had just memorized it. So if you don't know what we're talking about, go out and figure out what Fraggle Rock is. It's super weird. It probably makes more sense to stoners than it does to babies, but it worked great for babies too. Mike, let's talk DFS. What the heck's going on in DFS so far this week? I'm going to do this in a little bit of a more roundabout fashion. We're going to talk about what news we've had break so far that you're already working into your strategy for the day. Then we're going to loop back around to last week and talk a little bit about what went right and what went wrong. And then we'll get some of your picks for tonight. So what's the news, if anything, that you're waiting on for this evening?
So we definitely have some important news with, James Harden being on the slate, the most expensive guy, of course, well worth it. The number one thing we have to decide is, are we playing him or are we going to avoid him? And if we're going to avoid him, we need to see if there's any other expensive guys around or near his price that we could pivot to. So we're waiting to hear for Joel Embiid. We want to hear if Butler and Ben Simmons are going to be playing. If both those guys are out, it gives us a viable pivot right to, Joel Embiid, who's 10-8, who can easily still have a 60, 65-point game even against the Spurs. And what's normally not a great matchup on paper, but we're probably talking about Joel Embiid with a 40% usage. We got to keep an eye on Andre Drummond. Last I checked, he was still in the concussion protocol, and if he doesn't pass the protocol, then he's, even if he does pass it today, there's a decent chance that he might not be able to take the court. So we're waiting to hear on that news, because then we get to get all that usage for Blake Griffin. We get Zaza starting at center again. A lot of that usage over there as well. And we just got word on Kyrie Irving sitting out along with Al Horford, so that's gonna open up a ton for us over there. And I'd say the last bit that I'm really focusing on is Marc Gasol. Without Marc Gasol, it puts Jaren Jackson Jr. and JaMychal Green straight in the play. So we're gonna want to hear word if he's playing against that weak Hornets front court.
Man, that's a lot of stuff going on tonight. Okay, so let me see if I can remember some of the things that you mentioned. You talked about Joel Embiid, the Philly game. That's a 5 o'clock Pacific time game. That one is... No, excuse me. Wait, yeah, that's right. That's an ESPN game, so it's starting a little later in Philadelphia. So that's an 8 Eastern game. There's only one later game tonight. Denver-Utah is the only game on the slate that starts after 5 o'clock p.m. Pacific time. So there isn't really, or maybe I'm wrong, do you build your lineup related to time of games sometimes to make it easier on late swaps? And is that sort of now irrelevant tonight?
It's definitely a thing I look into. So I think I mentioned it sometime last week where I was completely, I think we talked about it on Twitter actually, where I said completely avoiding the first game could, be more beneficial just because you'll be able to late swap easier, because we were waiting on a lot of that news. So today it's going to be, you could do it. There's going to be some value in that Toronto-Indiana game. So if you wanted to, just play everybody in like the 7:30 games and later, you get an extra half an hour of a window where you could still pretty much adjust your lineup completely with 9 games worth. And you get an extra half hour of news. So we might be able to hear by then if Embiid's playing or not, or if we're going to get that, if JaMychal Green and Jaren Jackson are starting, we might be able to find that out there. But you'd also be missing out on, Van Fleet. He was a good value play tonight. Kyle Lowry, Serge Ibaka, and Siakam with no Kawhi Leonard also get a big usage boost. But if you feel like you can survive without those guys, then it's worth doing.
How do you know, related to this injury stuff? Because let me work myself into this question the right way, so I'm asking the correct terminology. We're already aware, as of yesterday, that Kawhi Leonard was going to be out for the entire week. So that wasn't a breaking piece of news today. The Kyrie Irving stuff, actually Al Horford was a piece of news we got yesterday as well. Does that mean, if the news breaks a day before, does that mean that the price of the player has definitely been adjusted, or does it just mean that it might have been adjusted? And how do you know?
It really depends on what time the news breaks the day before. So a lot of the times the slates for the following day will come out right around when lineups lock, maybe like an hour and a half after. Oh. So if we get that news prior to that, like if, I think we might have had
Kawhi, I think we knew.
The Kawhi knew, but that was a little cagey. So that happened last second, and they're always a little shady because it's just rest. So DraftKings is always going to keep his price around there, and Siakam and Ibaka are always floating around that 6 to 6.5 range. Unless we get, another game, like I'd say after today, we're going to see those guys probably take a nice price increase because it's been multiple games where he sat out in a row. And that's just going to be the one game where he's actually supposed to play. I think he's expected to come back in Houston. But it really depends on what time the news happens, because if we get the news a little bit later and the slates are already out, then they're not going to have time to adjust.
So then let me see if I can find examples of both directions. Detroit, for instance, Andre Drummond is still a game-time decision. That means that a guy like Blake Griffin, his price is based on what right now? He's at 9,700, which seems pretty high. So is that a price based on the expectation that Drummond is out for tonight's game because he's missed a couple in a row? Blake's put up big numbers and his price has then gone up? Or, so when for betting, and that's my background in kind of a similar situation, let me see if I can explain why this is something that I'm having a little trouble wrapping my head around. And maybe the listeners actually are doing better with it than I am, because perhaps they're not from that sports betting background. In my mind, sports betting lines are built based on whatever the most likely expectation is for the game tonight. So whatever information Vegas has, if they think Drummond is likely to play, they will change the line dependent on that, regardless of what happened in the last game. With DFS, it seems like there are a couple of different spices that go into this pricing game, where with Griffin, because Drummond's been out, he's put up 2 or 3 big lines in a row, and so his price has gone up. Would his price come down if Drummond was ruled in, or would his price stay high because he's put up those big games? And then at that point, the better play would almost be to go the Drummond direction. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, it completely makes sense. And what's going to end up happening is, they can't change the price of tonight's slate. That's already locked and set in stone. So we have Blake Griffin, who's 9,700, and Andre Drummond's 8,800. And yes, Griffin's being a little bit priced in force. He's normally around that 89 to 92 range. So he is seeing a little bit of boost, and that's for the potential that Drummond misses again. He was relatively, I think he was 94 the other night when Drummond sat. So you're also seeing it because of the matchup, and DraftKings takes a lot of that into account too. The matchup and the pace. They're playing New Orleans, who plays at a very fast pace, and Anthony Davis has already been rolled out, so they took that into account as well. So you're going to see a lot of times it'll fluctuate just based on matchup. There could be no injuries whatsoever, but you might see Joel Embiid be 11-4 instead of the 10-5 that he is tonight because he's playing the Nets.
This is where I always end up hitting my hiccups. It's picking the guys that are in between super cheap and super obvious. Like, yes, obviously, James Harden is going to have a giant game. The question is how giant. And by the way, just on the James Harden front, they're playing the Knicks, so there is the possibility of a blowout. Would you potentially dodge Harden because of that factor?
You could, but if they blow the Knicks out, it's going to be because of Harden does it all in 3 quarters himself. So his floor is always safe. He's always going to be that guy. At this point, until Paul comes back and until we get some of these other bodies back like Capella, he's going to be having a floor of like 60 points with the upside of 80 to 85. So like I said at the beginning, one of the things I always try to determine if I'm going to play or if I'm going to fade, I always do multiple lineups. So I'll always have at least 1 or 2 lineups fading him. But if I am going to fade him, who are the other guys I'm going to play over him? Because if he's 13-4, we already know we have loads and loads of value. We'll get to that later. I got value plays for days for you guys today. But we're going to have a lot of money to spend. And you could spend it up on Embiid 10-5, but I'm probably only looking to do that if either Simmons, Butler, or both of them are out because I want that extra usage. You want to capitalize. Right now we're paying a 10-5 price with them being accounted as playing. This isn't, if they were already ruled out the night before, we'd be looking at Embiid being like 11-5. He'd be seeing a huge price increase. And then we also have to wait on the Drummond news because the other play to pivot to would be like Blake Griffin, who's 9,700, who can easily put up a 50, 60-point spot. So if you have the other options and you can make it work, yes, you could pivot. And we did see, I think for the first time the other night, Harden did not technically make value. But even him not making value, if all your other value plays hits, you're looking pretty good still. You're just going to be missing out on one of those extra like $7,800 players.
So looping back around again to where I struggle the most, because at the bottom, this is my podcast, so I'm going to have you help me more than everybody else. Oh, that's damn right. Hopefully people can also take some things away from this. Where I struggle is the guys that sit somewhere between, like I said, Harden and Evan Turner, because I always end up using Evan Turner for some reason. And now I won't now because Mo Harkless is back, but that's the example. I think I'm pretty good at figuring out what ultra cheap, like totally whack guys are going to have okay games. And if you can get you can probably get a 6X on those guys pretty easily if they only cost you $3,400 in DraftKings, because there's just it's straightforward. Like Omri Caspi last week worked out really well in that regard. Andre Iguodala ended up having an okay game. Kevon Looney had a solid game. The cheap guys is not where I struggle. It's the in-between guys. Because James Harden had 85 points, and that was like, all right, fine, this is going to be obvious. You got to play James Harden. But then I went Donovan Mitchell and I went D'Angelo Russell. And even as I was doing it, I was like, well, I feel like Donovan Mitchell might be a tiny bit overpriced after a couple of really big games. They ended up blowing out the Clippers, which didn't help because he didn't get to play in the fourth quarter. But in my mind, I'm like, look, D'Angelo Russell, Houston, it's gonna be a good ball game. It went to overtime. He just happened to get benched in that one, and like in my mind, I can say to myself, well, that's bad luck. He's been great in every other ball game, and then he was just not that good in this one. But that happens to me literally once per week, where I'm looking at these like $7,500 guys, and I always pick the wrong $7,500 guy. So as we start to pivot towards tonight, and we'll do that in a moment, we'll get into specific names, but when you're looking for those in-between dudes, what is your move? How do you figure out where to spend the money that's not going to the maximum superstar and isn't going to the crazy backup, somebody's out, so I'm playing the injured player value play? How do you pick the $6,000 and $7,000 guys?
Well, the first thing I try to do is evaluate what positions I pretty much have locked in or close to locked in my head. For instance, tonight I have a ton of value for guard and center. So those are two spots I know I can get away with, going with the cheaper options and then spending up at the forward positions. If you make a lineup kind of in that way, where if you feel comfortable like I do about our guard value and our center value, where you think there's no way these guys can bust, well, now you have all the money to spend up on the forward spots that you were a little bit more worried about. You might miss out on a guy like James Harden, but you can also squeeze him in there, especially on DraftKings, where almost every guy on DraftKings, I'd say, except for some centers, are multi-position eligible. You'll get shooting guards that are small forward eligible, point guards that are shooting guard eligible, small forwards that are power forward eligible. So there's tons of ways you can mix and match. And even when you think you have it set in stone, where you feel just completely okay or comfortable about it, you can, if you have time, just sit there. Mix it. Try putting, let's say, like I'm looking at your lineup from last week, and when you're talking about Donovan Mitchell, he still played good. He got 43 DraftKings points. He wasn't overpriced really. He was priced up because he was dropping bombs every night while Rubio and these other guys were out. But the only thing I would have suggested is I liked Mitchell in that spot, but the spot I found a little bit better would have been Gobert, and I remember that they were pretty much almost the same exact price. Gobert might have been like a couple hundred less, and that's just a dream spot. It's a center against LA. They can't rebound right now. Starting Harrell at center sometimes. They're struggling. Any center against them, it's almost like that Nets matchup right now. So you could take advantage of that, and you could have just slid Iguodala up to guard and then easily played Gobert at utility. And you probably would have got an extra 8 points. But that's just one. That's nitpicking. We can go back and nitpick anytime we want, but it's always just kind of looking at it and look at the guys. Like if you're spending $8,500 on Mitchell, look at the guys around him. Is there anybody lower that you think is in a better spot or has a better chance of scoring, let's say 50 points? What are you looking for in that tournament? You have to take that into account. Mitchell's got that high floor, that relatively high ceiling. But if you can spend, this is a bad example for that night, but D'Angelo Russell's 8,000. He's a guy that can go out there and get 50. He's a guy that can get 30. So if you're playing in those tournaments where you need to be a little riskier, and you need to hit D'Angelo Russell on one of those 50-point nights, well, then there's your option right there. He'll be less owned, and he can easily put up just as much.
In this type of tournament, 100 slots, top 20 pay, do you have to get risky?
I always think you should get a little bit risky, just because if you're thinking like chalk across the board, that's kind of like what you're doing in a 50-50. That's the perfect strategy. You're not worried about anybody else owning the same amount of guys, but you just got to know when to and where to, I guess. And it's a little bit of like just kind of knowing the field, knowing like our tournaments that we've been playing. I told you like last week, Rashawn Holmes is on the slate. He's going to be 40% owned. It's kind of like it's something that you can notice while you just kind of keep playing these same tournaments. And you're going to see a lot of the multi-entry tournaments, the ones where you could put in 30 to 50 entries. Guys are going to take more shots. They're going to be a little bit riskier because, if they're putting in 20, they might be just taking shots on 2 or 3 lineups. It's not going to sink every single one of them. But, hitting one of those guys that's 3-4% owned on a hot shooting night can easily win you a tournament or at least get you to cash. And even if, you tie somebody in the top 5 or top 4 or whatever it is, you're going to win a lot of money with one of those lineups in a big tournament.
By the way, if I had played Rudy Gobert instead of Donovan Mitchell, I would have missed cashing by a half point. So that would have actually hurt me even more than what's right now. Would have put me exactly 1/2 point away from winning money on that slate. That would have been torturous. So just another quick look here at the rest of my card. To me, what I'm focusing on in looking back was Donovan Mitchell and D'Angelo Russell. Is there anything else on that card that struck you as good or bad in particular?
Well, I mean, I would just have to kind of go back over. I can look at my lineup real quick and I can get an idea of some of the value plays I played. If there's a little bit more value at guard, maybe take one of those because we were looking a little top heavy at guard. You spend a lot of your money on D'Angelo, Russell, Mitchell, and Harden.
Yeah.
So that kind of left you capped at your forward spots. And your forward and your center spots are two of the spots and two of the positions where you can easily get double doubles from rebounds. So that's one thing I always try to make. If I'm playing a cheap center, I want, Looney was a great play, but Turner's 18, that kind of hurts you. Ross was great. Iguodala was even great. This was just, it seems like actually, other than the Turner play, maybe Mitchell hurting you a little bit in the Russell. This was just a good week from everybody in our contest as well. I got to give it to everybody else because you did score 295 points and you finished in 37th place.
Can you believe that? That's crazy.
Yeah. So that I told you this might be again the case for tonight when there's the values out there. We had some value on that night. You hit the value right on the head, and the best part is you hit the value that was all cheap, like the low owned value. Yours wasn't chalk value. Iguodala 8%, Ross 5%. Caspi 2.
Yeah, I thought I was really rolling at that point, and then my D'Angelo Russell took a dump on my card, and the whole thing went down the toilet. I needed one more of those guys to kind of pop off a little bit, and that's what you talk about, where you take the risk on someone who could go a little bit bigger, and both of those guys for me, and Russell and Mitchell, were either bad or just okay, and that's where I ended up. What about your card from last week? You had a couple of them out there. I'm just glancing between
right next
the two.
To each other.
Yeah.
31 and 33.
And that you broke 300 and you were still 31st. That was quite a card last week. Gary Clark was one of your value plays. Colin Sexton looks like if either of those two guys had given you much, you probably would have cashed on at least one of those two cards because Draymond Green, PJ Tucker, those guys went huge for you.
Yeah, I got bit by the Mitchell bug in one of mine too. I had Ibaka in a good spot, low owned against Boston. I really liked him. He, put up a double, 22 and 10. I had a lot of good plays. I got crushed by Sexton mostly. 13.25 is terrible for, and he still played 30 minutes that night. And when you look at it, I was, 18 or 16 points out of cashing. So if I just got another, let's say a 20-point game from Sexton, 24 from Clark, like you said, there you go, I'm cashing.
And your other lineup, too, it's the same thing. If Sexton had given you 20 and if D'Angelo Russell had just hit 5X, he got us both. I don't think I even realized he got you on that one. All right, so enough bitching about D'Angelo Russell.
He's playing tonight in a matchup where he just went off. So it's going to be a night where I don't even want to say if I'm playing him or not, because if I do, you should probably do the opposite, but then that might burn you as well. So
yeah. Scumbag D'Angelo, you're screwing us here. I know it's just for us. All right, huge card tonight, 10 games, tons of injury stuff, as you already mentioned earlier in the podcast. But I'm not even that worried about the value plays because I feel like some of them are a little bit telegraphed. Like with Irving and Horford out in Boston, how deep do you go with that team? Do you go Rozier? Do you go Jaylen Brown? Do you go Marcus Morris? Do you try a backup center like an Aaron Baines or a Daniel Tice? Or is it still too many mouths to feed even with those two guys out?
I mean, I think we have enough value where you don't need to get too cute. Once you start playing guys that you're looking at 22 minutes tops like Tice, who could still perform in 22 minutes, don't get me wrong. We have other spots where there's other games where guys are within a few hundred that can easily play 30 with just as much upside. So it's also on game script. Do you think this game is going to stay close? Do you think it's going to get out of hand? It was a 16.5 or 16-point spread, I believe, before the Kyrie news. Obviously, the lines are going to adjust and drop a little bit, but Boston's still going to be favored probably by 10 points. But so what I'm doing is
looks like 13.5, by the way. Looks like it dropped from 16 to 13.5, by the way.
Ooh, that's barely even. Yeah, so there's still very, very good chance. So, you could pay up for guys like, Marcus Morris is going to be a very fine play. I don't know his exact price right now. I didn't even bother to look at it because I'm mostly looking at the guards over here. I'm looking at Rozier, Hayward, Brown, Smart. All those guys are going to see a decent bump in usage. I think Terry Rozier is basically, and Gordon Hayward are both basically a fancy point per minute player on DraftKings with Kyrie and Horford off the floor. They both have a usage of over 20%. Same thing with Brown. So it's really going to be getting the guys with the ball in their hands, taking the most amount of shots. And for me, that's going to be Hayward coming off the bench, Rozier starting. We'll probably see Brown starting as well. And if they only do play 24 to 28 minutes or whatever it is because of a blowout, these are guys that are costing, Rozier's 4K, Brown's 4,300, Hayward's 51, where they could still produce enough points in that amount of time.
Is there anyone else you look at in Philadelphia if guys like Simmons or Butler get ruled out?
Oh, 100%. And it's going to be one of my favorite plays on the board, and it would be like TJ McConnell. If even Ben Simmons is just out, we're going to see a lot of TJ handling the ball. And he's a guy that he gets it done very quickly in random small ways. It's going to be blocks here, steals here, a couple rebounds, a couple assists, 9 points, but he's going to be dirt cheap. I believe he's 3,800. You can take a look at like Wilson Chandler. You're going to have to take a look at guys like Korkmaz, but Korkmaz is a guy where he's probably next to minimum salary. But when we're talking about a guy like McConnell who's going to have the ball in his hands, it's only a few hundred more. I'm going to pay the few hundred more for McConnell over them if it's that situation. There's certain spots where just because the value's there, you need to compare it to other value on the board. If Korkmaz is 3,800 and Terry Rozier is 4K, well, look at the usage. Would you rather have the guy on the floor with usage of 16% playing next to Embiid, or the guy with the ball in his hands? And let's be real, the Cavs are terrible against opposing guards. Rozier could easily have
terrible against everybody.
Yeah, everybody is absolutely right. So he could easily have a big game, and yes, he's going to be chalk. But if a guy is 4K and he puts up 35 DraftKings points, you'll eat that chalk. There's nothing wrong with eating that. It's yes, if you avoid it, you could easily capitalize, but he doesn't need a lot. We're not looking at Terry Rozier starting with Kyrie Irving missing 3 games in a row. He's not 5,700. It's not a spot that we really need to think about too much. It's if you're avoiding him, it's because you're playing Marcus Smart maybe, or you could play both of them. Maybe you wanted to play Hayward a little bit more. You're getting some exposure to this game, and it's just you're trying to get cute if you don't.
What about some of the young centers that are flying under the radar a little bit? Like what about God, I can't even think of.
Don't even say his name.
Okay, I won't. What about?
I say it. If it's the same guy I'm thinking of, it's a disgusting name that I thought I'd never whisper on this podcast.
Is Jahlil Okafor?
Oh, that's the name.
Yeah. What about Okafor? What about Fareed? What about like Ante Zizic for Cleveland? What about some of these guys that are kind of no-namers that could be value plays at center?
You hit it right in the head. So when I came on, I was talking about finding a lot of value at guard and at center. And
whoa, Zizic is 6,000. I did not expect that when I said it.
I was going to get that. See, that was the segue I should have used before when we were talking about guys' prices changing, and that's one of the things. Yes, Zizic is still in the same spot as he was, and he was a great value play. And even at 5,700, he's been dropping 30 over the past few games, so he can easily get there. But now you got a price compare. Do you want to pay 57 for Zizic, or do you want to pay 46 if we know Jahlil Okafor is playing 30-something, 35 minutes again? And you got Enes Kanter over there at $5,000 against the Rockets. It's not generally the best, matchup on paper for centers, but it's one that we've seen just Jared Allen take advantage of the other day. And with Luke Cornett out, we don't know if we're getting 25 minutes or 35 minutes out of Kanter. I'm probably leaning more towards, the 25, 26, but 5K, he's a guy that we've seen. He could easily, put up 15 and 15 that quickly.
What about Kenneth Fareed? He's priced at 4,400, which isn't much, but it lends itself to more points than he scored in his last ball game. He had a 20 DraftKings point debut with the Rockets in 23 minutes, 13 and 6. He's generally a points rebounds guy, so I assume if you're grabbing him, you're hoping maybe he gets to a double-double. What do you think of that number, 4,400? Is that too high, too low, just right? Seems like he's going to play a little bit.
I like him. I mean, it's not one I feel overly confident in. If we knew he was getting 30 minutes, I would smash it every single day of the week. He's a guy that's a point per minutes guy. I was talking to my buddy the other day, and I mentioned, and he was 3K the first night right when he signed with Houston, and he was an instant lock play. You knew he was going to play at least 20 minutes. He outproduced Nene and played more than Nene. So if that's going to be the trend going forward, and especially against a Knicks team that without Cornette, they can't play as big, but they still have Vonleh. They still have Kanter. So they still have some bodies. Fareed's going to have to play over 20 minutes. And if he were to break that 30-minute threshold, he's going to be a steal at 4,400. If he plays the low 20s, then you're going to get a decent play with a little bit of upside baked in. And again, it's going to be coming down to evaluating whether you wanted to pay the 4,400 for him, or there's some other guys like Okafor's 46 in that range, Freddie Van Fleet's 46 in that range. So we have options. And this is the tough part when you're making a lineup, is evaluating your value, and it's kind of getting a grip on what order you want to play these guys, and then when you do make different lineups, you just take different shots at different spots with a couple of these different value plays, and I might have a list of 10 guys here between 3,700 and 5,300, all guys I'm going to be interested in, but if only 5-6 of them hit, you get a good chunk of those 5-6 in most of your lineups, you're going to be cashing in. You might lose one or two lineup in the meantime if you're a mass field player, but that's where it's kind of up to you to determine which value plays you like more than the other ones. And a lot of the times, if you were thinking earlier in the day that you were really on a guy and you hear me talking about him, well, just use it as a little reassurance. It's the same. Just go in there with the same kind of mentality and the same feelings you had on that player. But now you just feel a little bit more reassured that I did a bunch of nerdy research already too, and I kind of came up with the same conclusion as you.
Okay, so last question before I let you go. What about the guys that I keep talking about, that window where I pick the wrong one every week? What about the guys between 6,500 and 8,500?
I made you a list.
Thank you.
I made you, so I broke down a lot of my value, and then I kind of got if you're not playing Harden, what other guys you can look at around that,
Or even if I am, let's say I do, and let's say I've got Harden, 5 guys priced between 3,500 and 4,200, and so that leaves me 2 open spots where I can either go for, let's say I've got 14,000 left at that point, and I got to pick 2 guys. So I'm either going 2 guys. I'm either going an 8 and a 6, a 7 and a 7, or a 10 and a 4. So what if I was to go an 8 and a 6? What do I do? Who am I looking at?
If you're probably going to go an 8 to a 6, you can I'd either bump it up a little bit to Drew Holiday at 8,600. He's going to be in a good spot. You got Kyle Lowry a little bit lower at 72, and in that 6,000 range, we have Chris Dunn going against the Hawks. A big tournament guy. I'm kind of still going back and forth on his Whiteside. He's only $6K, which is really underpriced for him if he's getting 28 to 30 minutes. Clippers, like I said the other minute, they get decimated by centers. So this could be a big blow-up spot for him, or it could be a spot where we get a bit in the ass because we played Whiteside and he gets 20 minutes. And we still have Ibaka and Siakam. Both those guys, Pacers aren't the best matchup on paper, but both those guys are right around 6K, so those could be your 6K guys too.
Man,
we got plenty. Just looking at Blake Griffin's in a great spot, Vucevic's in a great spot. You got those forwards over there in New Orleans. Those guys are right in the middle. Randall's a little bit overpriced at 84, but we know what he can do. I'm probably leaning more Mirotic at 7. And this Bulls-Hawks game, again, this is 2 bad teams that are going to be battling it out. So looking at the studs in this game, like Dunn, Marketing, Collins, those kinds of guys, Levine, those guys are going to probably, come close or exceed producing. They're in very good spots in a high-tempo game. And just filling it in with the value plays that we talked about, a couple that I didn't mention maybe were Patrick Beverley's been crushing it. He's been scoring. He had to pick up a large scoring usage after Danilo Gallinari got hurt. He's kind of been rolling. DeAndre Bembry. Huerta might get ruled out. He's another injury that we have to keep an eye on. And if that's the case, Bembry, Prince, and Jeremy Lin all come into play. And Freddie Van Fleet, again, 4,600 in those Boston guys. So we have a little bit of value to tinker around with, to either fit in James Harden or mess around and throw like a Joel Embiid, Blake Griffin, or Vucevic. Throw a couple of those guys in there too.
This is overwhelming. So
I'm just going to screenshot you. I should screenshot you it anyway because it's kind of hilarious. My girlfriend wanted to kill me this morning, so I went out to breakfast at the diner, and those little placemats, those generic placemats with all the local businesses on it. I flipped it over, and I took my phone out, and I started writing down my favorite plays that I already had kind of in my head, and that is what I'm looking at right now. I'm looking at a generic diner sheet with a bunch of NBA players and prices on it. So you're going to get a picture of that.
We got to put that out on Twitter. That's going on social media for everybody's enjoyment. The expert of Beat the Expert fame, Mike Apotria. You can follow him on Twitter at Mike Apotria. My man, I'll talk to you soon.
Always a pleasure.
I can already tell you guys I'm going to biff that 6,000 range again. That's my move, man. I do great with the value plays. I got a pretty good eye for those fringy dudes that you can stream in full season stuff. Picking a superstar is real easy because, you just look at the matchup. And, like, with Harden today, I'm less enthused about it because, indeed, if it is a blowout, he's probably having a really good game, but he doesn't necessarily have to. It could be some more Eric Gordon. It could be more Kenneth Faried. The Knicks are terrible. I'll probably end up trying to get him in my lineup anyway, but it's those in-between guys that just kill me every time. Like, should I go D'Angelo Russell again? Back to the well? He's been playing great. His only bad game was the one where I played him in DFS. Otherwise, 55, 58, 55. I played him 26. That was an overtime game with the Rockets. Do I play him again? Orlando's actually been playing a little bit better lately. Does he go crazy? I don't know. John Collins in Atlanta, Tobias Harris. These are all those guys that are in that window. Not a huge fan of John Collins lately. He's been exclusively points and boards. I kind of need some of that other stuff to creep in there. Victor Oladipo is crazy low priced at $7,700 because he's frankly just not had that great of a season. But he's coming off a 41-point fantasy game. That would be a value play there if he exceeds that number. Tough to play the Grizzlies, although, Mike Conley usually gets his. Charlotte, game they should be competitive in. Jimmy Butler, if he plays, this is a revenge game for Philly. They got smoked by San Antonio. Kyle Lowry with Kawhi Leonard out. Niko Mirotic, Mike mentioned him as a guy at 7,000. He would need 3,500, although, his minutes are slowly ramping back up. He got up to 32 in that last ball game. That would have been enough to make the cut. Wish he would rebound a little bit more. Easier said than done, I suppose. The struggle with guys in that window. I'm telling you, man, this is my weak spot. That's where I got to get it figured out. I got to make my better calls in that 6,000 range. Or I just try to dodge it all together, and I go like, I wonder if this would even work. You got $50,000 to work with in DraftKings. Could you go 3 guys and use 30,000 of your, and the other 5 you use 20,000? I guess that's doable. Be tough, but doable. Anyway, we got that contest coming up tonight. As I always say, you can find the links. We send them out on Twitter, at Mike Apotria, at Dan Vespers, at Hoopball Fantasy, at Hoopball Tweets are the 4 links. Big thank you, by the way, unrelated to the great Lord Bogman. My guy, Scott Bogman. He had me on the NBA Takeaways podcast yesterday. That's bouncing around on Twitter right now. Check that out if you enjoy just talking about basketball. It's not a fantasy show. Very popular program, though. Very cool to be on that with Scott. And again, back to the DFS stuff, we can also get you on our email list. When these rooms open, we send out a note. Let me know at Dan Vespers on Twitter if you want to get on that email list, and we'll get you linked up that way. Figured we could go a little bit longer on DFS today because there wasn't much going on that Tuesday card. Frankly, very little. 4-game slate from yesterday. We can break down really the storylines. One of them, of course, is Kawhi Leonard, who had his one rest day turned into a 4-game break. They decided to just give him a few more days off. They're calling it load management, but the whole thing makes me very nervous. I don't like load management, especially when you got an all-star break coming up in less than a month from now, where you're going to get more load management. You can just take a week off in February as well. It does make me a little bit worried that something is going on, and they're not just giving him a week off for no reason. You could understand like a game off here and there, but a week? I don't know. I know on a podcast last night I started to get a little bit nervous and consider a panic move. I don't think you want to go full panic, but I think if you could find somebody in your league that's taking him off your hands and still get someone in the top 15 back, you might consider it. It just doesn't seem like, with Toronto rolling along at this point, I don't think they're going to push him down the stretch. And if you're in a head-to-head league, that could really hurt you. Of course, Freddie VanVleet decided to wake up the day that my head-to-head opponent went to stream him. Finally, the jerk. But nothing else really in that ball game. Lots of guys out on both sides. Iman Shumpert, Nemanja Bjelica, De'Aaron Fox, OG Anunoby, Kawhi Leonard, JV. Lots of injured dudes. You're not making too many adjustments from that. Marvin Bagley, double-double, 22 and 11. With Bjelica out, he will put up nice numbers if he's getting all of the power forward minutes. But it doesn't sound like Bjelica's too terribly hurt, just a lower back thing. Maybe a game or two on the shelf. Possible streaming option there. And you just have to hope that Bagley doesn't get to the free throw line because he is not good over there. Mo Harkless watch was on. He played in both legs of the back-to-back, but he only played 18 minutes in both of them, and I'm wondering if that's part of his kind of knee management stuff as well, and that's not enough for a low-usage 3-and-D kind of guy to actually put up any kind of production. We're going to need to see his minutes trend up in a very big way if he's going to get back on the right side of the cut line for us. But, of course, he does have a very fantasy-friendly game, so we'll keep one eye on him. Nothing really in that Clippers-Mavericks game. It all played out the way that we expected it would, other than Patrick Beverley, I suppose. The return of Dennis Smith Jr. also occurred in this one. We told you that would negatively impact Maxi Kleba. He played only 14 and a half minutes, so he's done for. DSJ actually had a decent ball game. Bad shooting from the field, but he made his free throws at the very least. He's not a guy you really want in 9-cat anyway. He's going to kill you with turnovers, with percentages. It's too many categories that weigh negatively on you. And if you bought the Wesley Matthews from that previous game, well, I've got a bridge to sell you too. He was clunky in this one. Patrick Beverley is the guy to focus on from this ball game. He had 16, 9, and 3. And you may remember after that big game, a couple games back for Pat Bev, I said that I really wished that it would happen again, but I didn't think it would. And it did. Actually, that was the last game. Excuse me. He's played well in 2 in a row. He's played well in 3 out of his last 5. And they're starting to see some defensive stats. I can't help but wonder if maybe he's finally getting healthy. Is that a possibility? Lou Williams played in this game. He was on a minutes restriction, so it's possible that Beverley got a few extra minutes. He's taking some more shots, which is unusual for him. He's rebounding, which he always does from the point guard spot. He's getting some assists, but more than anything, it's the defensive stats. Those just haven't been there all season for him. Looking at previous years, the 11 games he played for the Clippers last season, he averaged a combined 2.2 steals and blocks. In Houston, he was at 1.9. This year, he was at 1 combined steals and blocks as of last week. And that's been trending up. He's at 1.1 now after a couple of good ball games, but that's way below his career marks. And yes, some of it is playing fewer minutes, but the per 36s are off for him this year. And, obviously he's coming off big injury stuff. Maybe it just takes a long time to fully get revved up. I'm still not fully believing what I'm seeing with Beverley, but if the defensive stats are there, and if he keeps taking some 3 balls, he's always going to get you some rebounds and some assists because he's logging minutes at a point guard spot, and he's a good rebounding guard. And so in that case, I'd say, yeah, I guess you could take a shot on him and kind of see what happens with Pat Bev. They're playing tonight. You might get confirmation in this game in Miami. If he puts up one more good one, then you probably got to take a shot at him. You could even take a shot at him now if you're in a league where you can pick up a guy and stream him that night. But, Avery Bradley had a big game too. Gilgeous-Alexander has totally fallen off a cliff. This type of stuff is not, to me, fully believable. I don't think Avery Bradley can put up numbers on a night-to-night basis. Beverley missed some free throws in this game, and that hurt his overall numbers, but he got a steal, he got some threes, he had a bunch of defensive stats in his last ball game. That's the key for him. If the steals and sometimes blocks start to creep back into the picture, then you got yourself a guy that should be owned. I don't know why I'm as hesitant as I am. It just seems like there's too much of a logjam with this team, with Tyrone Wallace, Lou Williams, Gilgeous-Alexander, Avery Bradley, the aforementioned Patrick Beverley. They have guards. They have players they have Sindarius Thornwell who can throw into the mix. Also, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. They went 12 deep in yesterday's ball game. But Beverley played 35 minutes in it. So maybe we get a better idea after tonight's game in Miami. But if you don't think you can wait that long, and you've got somebody you could potentially cast out onto the wire, then Patrick Beverley could be a potential pickup. It's funny, too. Why hesitate on this guy? He was part of the Dan Besbris old man squad. I drafted him in the last round of a lot of my roto drafts, which is fine because, if your last round pick doesn't pan out, you just throw him back into the ocean. But I loved him then. Why am I hesitant now, I suppose is the question. Why? Well, we've seen a body of work this year that kind of tells us that it's not working. But maybe it's time. So anyway, keep an eye on that. Consider a pickup early if you want to jump the gun and get in front of it. But by no means it's a mandatory thing. Minnesota blew out Phoenix, and I kind of felt like this one was coming. It was a home and home, and yes, Phoenix lost in Minnesota, but it also felt like that was the game where the Wolves kind of took Phoenix too lightly with all their guys out. And then in this one, they were like, we're not going to screw around, and Cat went yakko, 25 and 18, 7 assists, 2 steals, a block, 2 3-pointers, 10 out of 15 shooting. Why is he missing free throws? I don't know, but tough to complain overall. Josh Okogie had 21 and 5 in this game. I don't think that's happening again anytime soon. Jared Bayless played 28 minutes off the bench, and Derrick Rose had a bad ball game in a rare twist. And Gorgie Jang and Devin Booker got in a fight, got ejected, and then tried to meet in a hallway. So fun for everyone on this one. Josh Jackson might have a little window here. TJ Warren left at halftime with an ankle injury. They're calling it soreness. Are they considering, is this the beginning of the dial down for the Phoenix Suns? Maybe. Does Devin Booker get suspended for anything? I don't know. I rather doubt it. But certainly if those two guys go out, then Josh Jackson has that massive opening to run through. Still no Rashawn Holmes, still no DeAndre Ayton in this ballgame. So you're not making any split-second decisions. Jackson's the guy that you're keeping one little eye on, but from a percentages standpoint, he will ultimately kill you in 9-category leagues. And so he's more a guy you'd watch in a points format. So not a whole lot of stuff from yesterday's card. 4 games, and they weren't even games we were keeping a tight watch on. A lot of revenge stuff on the docket for tonight. A lot of fantasy stuff on the docket for tonight, and a lot of it stemming, obviously, from what we talked about with Mike Apotria a few moments ago. Number one, Anthony Davis's timeline might be getting extended from 1 to 2 weeks to 2 to 4 weeks if it turns out that there's a fracture in his hand, and that's just terrible news. Brutal. He might, by the way, still end up as the number 1 fantasy player, despite now potentially missing up to a month of action. It's tough. I mean, we talked about it a little bit on the Real Big Three with Jonas and Scott last night, but my take on this is if you're in 3rd, 4th, 5th place in your league and you don't really feel like you can beat the number 1 team and you don't have Anthony Davis, that's a spot where maybe you consider taking a run at it. Because, you're feeling like, I'm probably going to get my team eliminated in the first round of the playoffs anyway. Even if I make the finals, I'm going to get waxed. Maybe you cast a second rounder off. See if the Anthony Davis owner panics, saying, what if he's a guy that's right on the bubble? Look for an Anthony Davis owner who's in 6th place in your league that knows he can't weather losing the best player in fantasy for a month. He'll lose the playoffs. Maybe you can go do something there. But you have to have a pretty healthy team right now, which is easier said than done because all of my teams are beat to hell. And you have to be in that right spot. Like, if you're in 2nd place, I don't think you make that trade. You're too close already. If you're in 1st place, no, you don't blow up what's already wrong. If you're in, 4th, to me, that's the one spot where you could consider making a massive roll of the dice and seeing how it turns out. So that's relatively large news. Toronto at Indiana, you got the Kawhi Leonard stuff going on. I don't think anything big really changes in Toronto if indeed he does come back by the end of the week. Indiana, they're getting healthy. Nice to see the main guys finally settling in a little bit. Orlando, Brooklyn. Hey, we got one good game from Jonathan Isaac right now under our belts. Could he potentially make it 2 in a row? We shall see. But the number is 3. We need 3 before I start to take anything too seriously. And I don't have confidence we're going to get there. Cleveland, Boston, a lot of guys out for the Celtics. Kyrie, Horford, but, creates a 1-game window. Ante Zizic, I'm probably rolling him out there tonight in leagues where I need a center. I'll stream him until we get any kind of word on Thompson, Nance, or Love. Clippers, you're watching Patrick Beverley. Miami, oh, who cares? Could Derek Jones Jr. actually get big minutes 2 games in a row? Maybe, but could it be 3? Probably not. Houston, Kenneth Faried watch. Absolutely. Cantor and Mitchell Robinson on the other side. We got centers aplenty these days to keep an eye on. Atlanta, you're watching, obviously, if Herter's out, Guys like Beverley, as Apotria talked about, could he not tank your percentages too hard while he's getting all those big defensive stats? Maybe. Taurean Prince, how do his minutes look? Is he going to start to shake the rust off a little bit? Chicago, not a whole lot there. We sort of know what we got. Charlotte, Memphis, the Grizzlies. I'm all in on Justin Holiday, man. I know he's not that exciting, but as a 9-cat guy, he makes a lot of sense. San Antonio, Philadelphia, you got some questionable tags in Philly as well. Detroit, New Orleans, waiting on Andre Drummond. I guess you could roll Zaza Pachulia out there, but I wouldn't recommend it. Julio Okafor, does he actually play big minutes 2 games in a row? I'll tell you what, if Andre Drummond is in this game, you probably do see 2 games in a row from Okafor of big minutes. If he's not, I don't think you do. I think you see New Orleans start to go a little small again. And then Denver, Utah, that's the marquee matchup in the late games. Should be a fun one. The only late game, I should say. Utah favored by 3.5. Tons of revenge angles on the board tonight. Absolute truckload of them. I think it might have been 8 of the 10 games. I'll go back and double check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 8 of them. One of them is a double revenge. Indiana's lost to Toronto twice. They obviously have an opportunity here with no Kawhi Leonard in that ball game, so we'll keep an eye on that one. Orlando lost to Brooklyn 5 days. I think it was just 5 days ago. Does that make sense? I'll have to double check on that. It was a pretty recent game, though. Cleveland lost to Boston by 33 earlier this year, and everybody's sitting out for the Celtics, so maybe the Cavs will give the old college try, but they've been terrible in this particular angle. Clippers got beat by Miami by 23 at home earlier this year. I really like this revenge spot, and I think people are a little bit down on LA after that loss in Dallas last night. Atlanta, Chicago. Bulls have been very good against terrible teams this year. Hawks, actually, believe it or not, are on the revenge here. Philadelphia lost to San Antonio by 27 in San Antonio a month ago, so a little bit of a revenge angle going on there. Detroit 0-1 against New Orleans, and Utah lost to Denver earlier this year as well. But certainly of those games, the ones that I like are Philly, the Clippers, and the Pacers. I wish the Pacers weren't laying such a medium-sized number because Toronto's generally too good to get beat up too hard, but it's a tough back-to-back for the Raptors. They had Sacramento at home that kind of ran them a little bit, even without De'Aaron Fox. And without Kawhi Leonard, that does cut them down a hair. Clippers, that's a back-to-back, so you hope they don't run out of gas, but you know they're going to be upset to beat this Miami team. And then Philly, same thing. You got to look at these revenge games kind of in a microcosm. I'm obviously going to be tracking all of them, but of the 8, those are the 3 that jump out as slightly more interesting to me. Good luck on your DFS cards this evening, everybody. I hope you appreciated the fact that I time-stamped it earlier in the show. I tried my best for those of you that refuse to take my hint and give DFS a try. Come on down, though. I really think you'll enjoy it. It's a fun contest. There are only 100 of us. They're all hoop ballers just gathering together and being weird and trying to win a little bit of money. Right now, there are 70 out of the 100 spots filled in the contest at 10:30 in this wonderful AM on Wednesday. Contest goes live in 5.5 hours from right now, probably closer to 6 hours or less from the time you're listening to this thing. Links on Twitter, and you can get us if you want to get on the email list. Thanks again to Mike Apotria for taking time to break it down on this Wednesday morning. I am Dan Besbris. This is Fantasy NBA Today, a hoop ball presentation. Oh my God, I can't believe I forgot to ask Mike what he was drinking today. I know the answer. I know damn well the answer is Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee Company, and that's my bad. That's my bad. That should have gone in the Apotria segment, but I will remind all of you that they are our presenting sponsor here of all audiovisual stuff going on at Hoop Ball. Hoop-ball.com, presented by Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee Company. Go to hawaiianisles.com. Check them out. Search for Hawaiian Isles on Amazon. I'm going to do it as I'm talking to you right now. I just typed in amazon.com. I'm going to the search bar. I'm typing HAWAIIAN space ISO. Amazon figured it out. You want Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee? Well, I do. And here we go. You got Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee, couple of bestseller tags. Ooh, Amazon's Choice. That's a good one. Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee, Vanilla Macadamia Nut. 10-ounce bag for $8.03. You can get that sucker Prime. Free one-day delivery right now if you got Amazon Prime. $8 to your doorstep. Check it out. Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee Company, at HI Kona Coffee on Twitter. And they'll be involved. They're going to keep us all awake to make sure we watch the end of these late game. We don't pass out after the 9 early games tonight. Tomorrow on the podcast, you got me solo. We'll do a recap of all these big Wednesday games. We got so much center stuff to talk about, and just a short Thursday card as well. Friday with Brew, that'll be recorded this week. So Aaron and I will talk about all the biggest stories of the week and get you situated for another weekend of hoops action. Thanks again for listening, everybody. Thanks to those who have taken the time to rate and review the podcast over the last little bit. Thank you to those that continue to follow on Twitter. Check out the Hoopball forums and whatever else it is that keeps you all engaged with us. The community aspect of this is arguably the most rewarding when we're like, well, how's Hoopball growing? And then we can look back and say, well, we got all these people that are interacting. That's really fun for us. So big thank you to that as well. Again, for Mike, I'm Dan. Have a great Wednesday. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.